Hello, it's Dr. Jimmy again, and I'm finally getting back to continuing my history of Halloween Horror Nights. This is part 8 of Horror Nights History 4, Reflections of Fear, Halloween Horror Nights 18 from the year 2008. I know that an awful lot of you are probably much more interested in Halloween Horror Nights of the future. Mainly, of course, the upcoming event of Halloween Horror Nights 22. And what's going to happen and what won't happen and what will it be like and oh my goodness. But I'm afraid everything that can be said about it has actually pretty much been said. There's no new information so far. There may be some new information soon, hopefully something official, but of course there's been no official announcements yet, and I've not yet heard anything new other than what I have been able to share with you. So let's forget about the future for a bit and go back to the past. In my last video of this series, I talked about the house called Creatures, and I didn't quite finish. I think what I left off was mentioning the one drawback about Creatures was there weren't a lot of creatures in Creatures. And that was because, as I said, the costume design, which was this great big one-eyed monster with tentacles, was too big to go through the usual boo-ho and other entrances that characters used to get into the houses. There was only one area where they could actually get into the house near the end of the attraction, and they had sort of a wall, and behind that wall, it's like little slats, you could see the creature back there with his tentacles and his eyeball lurking about. A rather ridiculous and comical looking thing. In some ways, I hate to say this, of course it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek house, a bit. It wasn't, one of the more serious houses in a lot of ways, and it was, fun. But the thing looked for all the world like something out of SpongeBob SquarePants. A little bit like a gigantic plankton with a bit of Cthulhu added to it. But yes, it's going to get that Krusty Krab recipe or die trying. And then the end of the house, you had some creatures, a huge thing on the ceiling, and some people that had been killed by the creatures and been burnt and roasted by them, and a rather nasty thing which was actually an animatronic from the Thing, a simulation house being reused, and at least that's what it looked like. And the smell, that smelled a lot like barbecue, I think, from the people who had been burnt and destroyed by the aliens, giving you a nice barbecue smell, which made me kind of hungry. And if they had one of those stands that sold turkey legs right outside, it would have probably sold a few of them, as they would have for another house, the next house I want to talk about, and that's Doomsday. Once again, I've got a DVD. This is the DVD, of course, because of the nature of these videos, it's backwards. But Doomsday, the house was located in the disaster queue area. It was a direct adaptation of the motion picture Doomsday, which had not been a tremendous hit. It's basically an apocalyptic end-of-the-world scenario type of movie. The theme of the movie, if you haven't seen it and don't know about it, is that a terrible plague broke out, sort of like one of those zombie plagues from films like 28 Days Later and 28 Weeks Later. I'm surprised they don't have 28 Months Later as a third part of that. But similar idea that broke out in the United Kingdom. And the United Kingdom got cut off from the rest of the world. so that the plague wouldn't spread. And they managed to isolate the plague as best they can in England itself. You know, in the late Roman Empire, there was an emperor called Hadrian, who famously built a wall in Britain to keep the Picts, the Picts, of course, being the ancestors of the Scots, out of England, or out of Roman Britannia, so that they wouldn't come down and invade, to keep those people at bay. That didn't work very well, but this was the idea. They built a barrier closing Scotland off from the plague, so that, and I'm trying to remember if the plague was in Scotland or if the plague was, I think the plague was in England, so that this was a place where they could be free of the plague or something. And in Scotland being cut off from the rest of the world for some reason, they resorted to cannibalism. And so somebody, it's been a long time since I've seen the damn movie, but there was a team, especially this one woman who was part of the team. They went into Scotland to find something that they could use to cure the plague. Apparently there was some sort of cure available there that some mad scientist, played by Malcolm McDowell, and they were going to go up there and find it or something, or rescue somebody. And they had to go through, of course, all of the cannibals who would try to eat them, barbarian tribes of cannibals, because they had descended into barbarism, and go find this mad scientist or whatever and get what they were going for. And of course there was a lot of killing and mutilation. It sort of got a bit Mad Maxy up there with the cannibals, who looked like they came right out of Mad Max, with their mohawks and buff bodies, and there was the settlements that the scientist had were like medieval, and people, knights in armor and castles, and they used some of the very same castles and locations in Scotland where they had filmed parts of Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which really made that funny, because there was almost references to that a couple of places. So it was really a silly movie in a lot of ways, but it did make for a fun house. Again, a lot of people thought this was a campy, corny house, and some people really hate this house. I actually liked it because I found it to be quite amusing. You start out in the plague-ridden parts of London, and then you go through into the medieval section, and you deal with the knights in armor and all of that, and there's a guy barbecuing dead people for cannibals, and it was rather amusing, I thought. But what made it a standout was one or two characters who did a damn fine job of exciting everybody. There was a fellow named Mendonca, and the other characters who played the part of the character Saul. Saul was the leader of the cannibal tribes, and apparently the son of the mad scientist. And he was this, barbaric figure with his mohawk and his muscles. And here you can see him. That's if you can see, that's him on the bottom from a rear shot. See his big the biological hazard tattoo on his back, and a gun, and his mohawk. So we had this guy was played, and he would do a little dance for anyone who would say the right words. There was another fellow who was, there was a gimp in the movie, a full-on leather bondage gear type person, and he would do this dance if you said the phrase fancy peacock, and then they would do a dance. It was kind of funny if you knew how to get that little extra thing going there. At the end of the house, they had a big stage set up, and you're actually outdoors, but you're still in the house, and on a stage, because there was a scene in Doomsday where Saul performs on stage and sings songs from Adam Ant and the Fine Young Cannibals, Good Thing, and other songs, and they actually would perform the music there, and of course there are people with chainsaws coming at you, but a lot of people would stop in that area and dance while the guy on stage was performing, and and it was actually a lot of fun. You can find videos here on YouTube of that performance. It actually turned the house into a bit of theater, and it was a lot of fun. Of course, as you exited the house, chainsaws were after you right away. So it was, again, it was a fun house. It wasn't necessarily the scariest house they ever created, but I thought it was a laugh and a gas, and I liked it for that reason. Okay, moving on to the sprung tents. We've covered 4 houses now, halfway done with the houses. The 2 sprung tents. Now, I've always had problems with which tent is 1 and which tent is 2. I think tent number 1 is the house that you would enter going through Kid Zone, normally the queue area, and the house that has the queue area normally by Men in Black is house number 2. I may be wrong, but that's what I'm thinking. So that, if I'm correct for our purposes, then tent number 1 had the house called the Hallow. The Hallow is said to be, by some people who probably knew something, sort of unofficially based on Ray Bradbury, my 9th cousin. Yes, I was related to the late Ray Bradbury. We were cousins. We're descended from the same Salem witches, by the way. Just a little weird thing. But his book, The Halloween Tree, originally it was going to be an animated motion picture that he was going to, or actually an animated television special originally that he was going to do with Chuck Jones, the Bugs Bunny fame, and that fell through, and then he wrote the book, and then later it did become an animated film years later, done with other people. But the whole idea is there's a bunch of boys who on Halloween discover this strange haunted house and a weird, sinister figure who takes them through history, time, and space and shows them why their Halloween costumes represent the various things throughout history of Halloween, from ancient Egypt all the way up through different time to the Day of the Dead in Mexico, and they learn all about the history of Halloween through this whole story. The Hallow was like that. It went back into the history of Halloween. Whether or not it was really adapted from Bradbury's book, I don't know, but I've heard that claim. But it was a representation of the history of Halloween from the ancient Celts all the way to today, with various scenes and motifs from Halloween being featured in different rooms. It was really niftily done. Presiding over the Hallow was a sinister figure, this tall, imposing, satyr-like creature with a ram's head and topless, big muscles and all that, very buff, and one of the hottest characters ever at Halloween Horror Nights, if you're into that sort of thing. And he was named Samhain. This is spelled S-A-M-H-I-N, and it's pronounced Samhain in the Celtic language, even though a lot of people say Samhain because they don't know how to pronounce those Celtic words. But Samhain is not actually a god. There are some who have characterized, the Celtic god of the dead was Samhain, and he was the lord of the underworld. And this was the idea they had when they made the character for the house, but that's actually a misconception. Samhain is simply, the old Celtic language means summer's end, and it's actually the name of the day, October 31st, which we call Halloween, was the celebration of Samhain. It had nothing to do with a particular deity who was the Lord of the Dead. There is a Celtic Lord of the Dead. His name is Anan, and he had nothing to do with Samhain, the festival. But that was just something that some modern people have done. And of course, Christians have seized on this figure as satanic, and a lot of people who don't know anything about Celtic religion or history just assumed it was the devil. And I remember people, seeing this character saying, "Oh, hello, Satan," which was a complete, inappropriate for the character, which was basically a sort of. But the horned god is a figure in Celtic mythology. There is a horned god called Cernunnos, who also could fit this, except he usually has stag horns rather than ram's head. But it's still a horned god, a fertility deity of many pagan faiths. So in that way it did sort of fit in, although it really isn't a Halloween figure. But that was presiding over the house. And I've run out of time already, so I'll continue with the Hallow on my next video.